Every moment needs to be recorded in that case.
You know what? That's how we're starting this podcast. Every moment.
We're all naturally fabulous.
I'm Jeannie Villette Bowerman,
And I'm Kira Duggan.
and you are listening to The Story Will Save You. I took this upholstery class this last weekend, and it actually made me think about writing and the value of an editor, which is why,
Ooh, what a good transition. It's
right?
like you do this for a living. Oh my God.
And we have Chantelle Aimée Osman with us today. So Chantelle has this super long bio, but I will just tell you a couple things about Chantelle before we get into a conversation. She is currently the senior editor at Simon & Schuster's newest imprint, Simon Maverick. And I can't wait to dive into a little bit more about what that imprint's doing. But she's done 10,000 things. And she also has these really cool, like the quick and dirty guides too. And her Words of Prey podcast still lives up on our site, which I would love to revive. But I'm going to link to her host page on Symposium because that has the full bio. You need to go read it. That's your homework. And we'll also talk about her upcoming symposium that's going to be on July 23rd called Beyond a Query, the first 50 pages. But before we get into all that, let's just have some fun and talk about writing. So I started to say this upholstery class reminded me of writing because I did like an old school, like horsehair old school upholstery class. So like that's like writing. It's like you can't skip through the layers. You can't skip through these things and expect a beautiful final product. Like maybe the book cover is beautiful, but you open it up and it's just a hot mess in there. So so everything in life applies to writing, in case you haven't noticed. So Chantelle, as an editor for a zillion years, how many years have you been an editor?
Oh, way too long to count. My fingers don't go up that high.
Okay, and we also don't want to talk about age here. Or say
I
anything
would
that
say
gives away.
conservatively 15, maybe 20 years. I mean, honestly, my whole life, surprisingly, like everybody else on the planet, my whole life has surrounded words in some way. So yeah, that was not pretentious at all, and we can just take that out.
Oh, we leave all the pretentious stuff in. That's the fun stuff. Okay, so we've talked to you about querying before. So maybe let's do I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on querying, but just like a few tips about querying. I know you have thoughts on comp titles.
I have thoughts on a lot of things, as you probably know all too well. Um, Querying, I will try to give some bullet points. So, first of all, make sure that you find an agent or an editor that really aligns with your taste. Like, don't just send it out to people to send it out to people. Find the ones that are right for you. You're creating like your village, you're creating your family, you're creating your team. And it's I've used the analogy, it's a lot like dating. Like you've got to go through a bunch to find the right one for you, and you should approach agents and editors and publishers in the same way. So having that kind of mentality, that it's not like everyone isn't the be all end all, and making sure everything is, you know tidy as possible on your end. So a query letter and a pitch that is just really tight. You know what you're talking about. And you just get in and out and see if they're interested. And if not, you move on to the next person, because a no is just part of the journey.
Okay, so say you've got a beginning writer and they're going to be querying for the first time, like how many agents at a time should one query before like doing it in batches? I know some people have thoughts on this.
And apparently my doggos do too. So I will introduce and apologize. My three crazies that are in here with me: Tamerlane and Henry, the Boston Terriers, and Lafitte, the polydactyl cat, all of whom really desperately want to be on this podcast and will probably have thoughts throughout our conversation. So apologies in advance for their interruptions.
Oh my God, those are great names.
I can't wait for their take.
I don't know. I'd probably pick my top five or top 10.
Mm-hmm.
and go out to those and then, give them a ridiculously long amount of time because it's probably not you, it's probably their inbox. And so, that's one of the uh, parentheses of very few great things about social media is that we can kind of tell where an agent or editor is in their slush pile. They often talk about it online. So you don't feel like, oh my God, it's been, 2 months and I haven't heard anything. Clearly, they just hated it. You might know that they're just super behind or close to queries or whatever the situation might be.
So you mentioned social media. I saw a post recently by an agent saying like when somebody's querying, they always go and look at the social but talking about like what she's looking for. And I hadn't really thought about I thought about like not being a hot mess on social, but I hadn't really thought about like what content you're actually putting out. Um, and she was specifically saying she wants to see writers who are supporting other writers and posting about other writers or posting about the book they're reading. And she really wants to see their whole social filled with, I am a consumer of books and I am active in the writing community. And I hadn't really thought about that more than just thinking about social, about not being a hot mess.
I think it's kind of twofold. Number one, your job as a writer is singular, and that is to write a great book. And that's the beginning, middle, and end of your job. So if you do that, you don't necessarily have to be also a social media maven or a self-publishing maven or all of these other things. I would rather see somebody who's like completely absent from social media and has written a great book than somebody who I don't know. I mean, I'm going to list all of the terrible sins of like, oh, you started an account in 2015 and haven't posted since, or, you have an outdated blog, or your social media is about just something completely that has nothing to do with your book. So I don't know, you're writing romances and I don't know, you live tweet baseball games. Um, so, seeing all of those other things are less important to me. Obviously, if I consider social media a value add. So going to that agent's point, if you have a social media where you have a large number of followers and you're talking about books and prioritizing other voices, that's definitely a value add and a plus in the plus column. But like I said, I'd rather see nothing on social media, like it's not something that you do, and you've written a great book, than have is it okay to say half-assed?
Yeah, you can say whatever you want to say.
Half-assed social media or something that is extremely polarizing. Let's just put it that way.
I think I'm going to put half-assed on my business card.
I love the honesty. Just upfront. Just let them know.
Let
I'm
them
gonna
know.
half-ass this guy.
Right out of the gate. Now let's switch over and let's get into being an editor. What we're trying to accomplish here, Chantelle, is educating writers on how to work with editors so that it makes your job easier because they know what you
Oh, see,
want.
that's not the goal for me. The goal for me is to have that writer get more insight into themselves so that whatever book I'm working on can be the best book that it can be. And then they take those. I hesitate to say lessons because generally they're things that they teach themselves. It has very little to nothing to do with me. But they take those learnings and apply them going forward. And then the next book is, better than the previous book. And the book after that is better than the previous book. And that's kind of the goal of an editor is just to go like, you've really got this, but have you thought about it this way? And then they probably don't think about it in that way, but think about it in a really cool, different third way that you hadn't thought of yet. Um, and that's the win.
Do you ever get writers who are really resistant to your feedback? And
Yeah.
how do you deal with that if you're like,
First of all,
I've been doing this so long, like
I have
take
to
my
say it's
advice.
pretty rare.
Okay.
Fortunately, it's pretty rare. I think that one of the traits about most writers, especially most successful writers, is the desire to learn and evolve. Um, my closest friends who are writers are the ones who are always trying to push the envelope, figure out something different. They don't want to write the same book over book. They want to, make those. It's just like somebody who's learning, I don't know, an instrument, piano or something. You're not going to play the same chords over and over. You're going to play that piece and then a slightly harder piece at the next recital and a slightly harder piece, right? Because you're just getting better and it's that muscle memory. And I think that's the same thing that kind of editors do. We serve that role of the like super mean piano teacher that forces you to practice and then suddenly hopefully unlock something for you that you didn't know was in you. But as far as people who don't take the advice, I mean, it's a subjective business. I know I'm not right a lot. um, but the thing is not necessarily to go, hey, this is wrong, or hey, you need to change X to Y. It's recognizing why your reader, whether or not it's me as your editor, your agent, your friend, your beta reader, why they stopped in that spot, why they have an issue with it. Kind of, I always say, forget the fix that they give you. Like, don't listen to, here's how you fix that problem, because that's what humans do. Like, we don't necessarily identify the problem, we provide a solution. And as a writer, you have to go, okay, let's identify the problem. Why did that reader, why did that editor, what happened that made them stop at this point? Um, because I think that's the value of having a reader, and figure out how to fix it in your own way then. And of course, you don't have to. And I always say at the end of the day, it's your book, it's your words. There's really not a right or wrong here. Although I will say sometimes there are wrongs. There are very, very big wrongs. But on the whole, no, it's really what you want to be out there in the world. And I am either telling you how I feel you can get better into the emotions of your readers, or how a book can be more marketable and get in front of more people. And it's your choice what to do with that. I will say, though, that the people who are the most open to learning in all the different ways are the people who are the most successful. And the people who don't listen are the people who end up frustrated in the end with, the industry and things not working for them. And that's not an always situation, but, kind of.
Yeah, I would agree. And last night on Script Chat, we were talking about feedback and stuff like that. And I know you do editorial and consulting work as well, outside of your job at the Imprint. But I've always looked at, and I appreciate what you're saying about the editor's role, because I've always looked at, whenever I've hired somebody to give me feedback, and now, especially in the beginning, but now I have trusted friends in the screenwriting space, but not in the novel space. So I intend on hiring you someday, Chantelle, so get ready for that. But it's like, it's the same thing. Like, I approached by getting my kids a physics tutor, like, you these listening to somebody's feedback and expertise is going to get you to a point where you're elevating your writing, you're learning. It's all still learning. I mean, I think, like, okay, back to that upholstery class. He was saying that apprentices, people would take an apprenticeship and usually would last 7 to 8 years. And that aligns so much with what I've always said about writing, is that it takes like 7 or 8 years of doing it to really learn how to be a writer. And so that requires a lot of instruction. Whether that's classes, you can do a certain amount self-taught by reading and great work. But at a certain point, you need somebody to look at your stuff and say, have you thought about this? Or have you thought about that? Or this is pulling me from the story, or, you're head hopping, or, all of that stuff that you might not even realize you're doing.
Well, I mean, I think one of the really important things that you just said was that you can actually, you can and probably should hire an editor or have an agent or have trusted beta readers. But not everybody can afford a lot of those things or has a
Mm-mm.
luxury to have some of that. And the thing that you can absolutely 100% teach yourself is by reading. I had a friend, his name was Will Lavender. I still highly recommend his books. It's like Westing Game for adults. If you remember the Westing Game series. But in any case, he had MFAs, he had all of these graduate degrees. And he said, and he was a New York Times bestseller, and he said the thing that taught him how to write and how he got a New York Times bestselling book was by going into his bookstore, local bookstore, and reading the things that were like in the new release and the best of and the award-winning books, but then also going and just like reading the worst books that he could read. Like by reading everything, he gave himself an education that he felt, and not to knock an MFA program because I teach for them as well, and I think a lot of them are extremely valid and wonderful. But he said, that MFA did less for me than just reading what was out there at the time.
Yeah.
So, make sure that you're, reading is learning. In addition to taking classes and attending workshops and seminars and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So also too, okay. So I want to just, because when you talk about reading, I actually do a lot of audiobook
Me
listening.
too. Like
Yeah.
primarily.
I mean, I love a good book in my hand, but it's hard with life. And I walk the dog twice a day. So that's a perfect time to put my earbuds in and listen to audiobooks. Um, there's a whole little conversation sometimes people have about, are audiobooks reading? Because you're really listening. I know it's a very different experience, but in the new imprint that you're working for, Simon Maverick, that it's audiobook based, isn't it?
Yeah, we're primarily audiobooks. I mean, we do partner with other SNS imprints for print occasionally, but yes, it's primarily audio. And I will say, it's people are showing up to books in different ways than they did 5 years ago, than they did 10 years ago. We're seeing, the most popular books are not necessarily the number one on the New York Times bestseller list, or it might be somebody who's a completely indie published or hybrid published author. And audiobooks are, I don't know, I kind of feel like we're in an era that's relatively reminiscent of when ebooks kind of started to hit their peak, because people were going, they're not going to stick around, this is not going to work. Um, and I remember even 5 years ago, most of the people who listened to audiobooks got them out of the library. It was a physical, it was a CD or something similar. It was relatively unpopular. And now it's a extremely popular method to consume your media. And it's important for traditional publishing to recognize these shifts in publishing paradigms and make sure we are, wherever people are consuming their books, that's where we are.
And I wonder whether part of that is, like society has gotten to the point where we don't know how to sit still. We don't know how to be quiet. And so we're always looking for something to be consuming or doing while we're doing everything else.
I know.
Yeah,
I know that's why I do it. I just feel like my to-do list is so long that then by the end of the day, it's like you're just so tired. And like I know that when I sit down to read a physical book, it's like I fall asleep. Like my
Yeah.
eyes can't physically handle it after working all day, looking at a screen all day, parenting all day. It's like, okay, well, I'll listen to it while I get all the other billions of chores I need to get done, unloading the dishwasher, folding laundry, like, and then I feel like, okay, because habit stacking is such a thing. It's like, okay, well, I'm still consuming my fiction and nonfiction. I'm just being more efficient about it. But it part of that also makes me a little sad. Like I love physical books and I don't
Yeah.
want that to go away either. So,
I don't think it's going to go anywhere. You know, the ebook didn't kill physical books, audiobooks definitely won't. And I think, I don't know, for me, it's a reward, you know, and I don't know if everybody thinks of it that way, but it's like, you know, if I'm commuting or if I have all of these errands or tasks at home to do, I can pop in my earbuds and my body can be doing that thing, but my mind is listening to this awesome book or awesome podcast. And so even though this is time that I'm considering kind of like a net loss because I'm doing something I don't want to be doing, it's not anymore because I can do that thing that I really want to be doing while I'm doing it.
Yeah.
exactly.
And I have to say, I have Kira to thank for my audiobook addiction now, because I think it was about a year ago when we were at Thriller Fest last year. I was like, I just cannot read enough books. I sit down at the end of the day and I'm tired. And she's like, audiobooks, girl, like just put what is wrong with you? And I was like, oh my God, it was life changing. I've consumed so many books in the last year. It's been fantastic and really inspiring. And I think, and we did a whole other podcast, which I'll put in the show notes with an audiobook narrator, um, which is really, really interesting to hear about it from their perspective. So, Chantelle, when you guys are doing all these audiobooks for authors now, is a lot of your time spent with audiobook narrators too, or are you collecting a group that you just like your go-to people and you know that they'll fit this book? Like, how is that working for you, working with both narrators and authors?
Well, first of all, I will give the standard legal disclaimer that, you know, my opinions are not those of Simon and Schuster, et cetera, et cetera. But that being said, I am just learning a ton about audio, and narrators are amazing. And I think that the best way that I can for my fellow Luddites out there, um, there was always that moment where an author knew that they really had a book or they had made it when they see the cover for their book, right? Like the cover was always a thing, a very special thing that they have in their head. And like, this
Mhm.
is the cover I dreamt of. This is, you know, how I mocked it up. I am experiencing as much of that, if not more, with the audiobook narrators. Like these are the voices I heard in my head when I was writing this book. And therefore, you know, please get this narrator, please get that narrator. And I think it's really awesome, because it's really putting like a voice to those muses that were in the writer's head. And at Maverick, we always ensure that authors have narrator approval, and we try to get, you know, whoever their dream cast is as much as possible. And it's just been really interesting to see, you know, how that adds another layer of creativity that I wasn't as familiar with before, um, to the whole publishing process.
It's really fascinating, sort of like even in filmmaking, when you learn all the different layers, the different people who are involved to make this film. And when you start learning more things about publishing and all the different forms of it, audiobooks and ebooks and whatnot, and self-publishing and hybrid publishing and all of that, it's fascinating. And when we first started talking to, an audiobook narrator, I ended up having like an old friend of mine who knew the woman who we interviewed, who also does audiobooks. And then it was like, wow, it's also a great way for actors who are looking for a job to like can't find a job acting maybe and start thinking, well, maybe I could do this. And it's so much fun listening to them and listening. Some are better than others.
Okay, well, I've got to interrupt, and
Yeah.
I will date myself so bad here. Are you ready?
Yes.
So, do we all know who Bronson Pinchot is?
I think I know the name,
The
but I
name's
also have a
familiar.
terrible memory. So,
He was okay. So there was this show in the 90s called Perfect Strangers.
oh yeah.
And it was Cousin Larry and then Bulky, who had moved from some, I don't recall what Eastern European country to the US to live with his cousin. And he had this absolutely ridiculous accent. And then this same actor went on in the Beverly Hills Cop series. He was one of the employees at an art gallery and kind of stole, I think it was Beverly Hills Cop 2, 3, totally stole that series and did a cameo in the most recent one. So this is a character actor who has been known for his really weird off the wall voices. Kind of think of a Bobcat Goldthwait, but in a more European sense. Anyway, I had no idea because I started listening to these audiobooks, I don't know, years ago. And I was like, why does this name sound familiar to me? And I look it up, and it's this same actor who was bulky in this Perfect Strangers and this crazy accented art dealer in Beverly Hills Cop. And he is now like one of the top and most famous audiobook narrators.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I find that very amusing.
Yeah.
He's particularly famous in that community, and it was something that I would have never expected.
I mean, there's so many jobs, random jobs too, that you can have in the arts that people never thought of. Well, like, what is your biggest challenge working with authors as an editor?
I think that the biggest challenge is probably trying to ensure that the author understands that they have this space to be themselves in a book. And they don't have to write to a trend. They don't have to write in a voice that they feel is like somebody else's or like something that is popular. And they can just really be who they are in the pages of a book, and that their own voice is as strong as somebody else who, is already a success.
Yeah. I saw a post on X the other day about how, and again, this is in the screenwriting space, but they were like, I don't understand what producers and what they're looking for. And I know people have said the same thing about in the publishing space. And my response was, I think people know what they're looking for when they see it. Like it's not always this thing that they say, I want this genre with this kind of character, with this kind of thing. Like, have you come across things that you've like, brought up the ladder that were really unexpected? Like you were like, I never thought I would see this kind of story, but I absolutely love it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the list goes on, and those are some of the best books. Like when I was at Agora, I would say that Tricky by Josh Stallings was one of those books because I don't love police procedurals, and this was a very like the protagonist was a very typical uptight cop in Los Angeles, and I was like, I am not going to enjoy reading this, but the perspective was so fresh,
Mm,
and his juxtaposition against this murder suspect who was neurodiverse and had a questionable background. Um, and it just showed a character progression that I've not seen before. Um, when I was at Lake Union at Amazon Publishing, which is their imprint for primarily like book club fiction, I acquired a book that I called it my little cannibalism book that could. It was a historical based on a quest for the Northwest Passage. Um, and completely something that was not, and again on paper I would go, no, this is clearly not a Lake Union book. Why am I reading this? Why am I acquiring this? But there was such character exploration, and the ethos really at its core of Lake Union was an emotional protagonist journey, and I don't know that I'd seen one quite that affecting. So that book was absolutely a Lake Union book, but something that I would have never ever expected. Um, so I think that's very true. But I also think more to your point is I'll go back to the writing on trends thing. Like I have I've seen enough of X, I've seen enough of Y. Um, and that's because something hit that was very popular, and then people went back and either rewrote to fit, or were like, okay, this is a great, conceit. We're all going to do this now. And I hate to say, as an editor, especially for as long as I've been one, it's kind of easy to tell if somebody really has a passion for what they're writing, or if they think that they're writing to fit some sort of trend. Or, I'll go kind of, one of the things that I see a lot are like the wellness influencers, White Lotus type of storylines. And like, there's so many of those, and we're not looking for those anymore. Um, and although I've said that, I will say that a few of those situations where I've gone, oh, I can't stand another one of X, or I can't stand another one of Y, and then I'll get one that is just so unique and different. It's like when Twilight was super popular, and everyone went, oh my God, now we can't write a vampire book. And I'm like, no, if you have a passionate story in your soul that happens to include a vampire, like write it, because it's going to be different from everything else.
Mm.
Um, and so, just because something's on trend, it shouldn't stop you, but it shouldn't start you, if that makes sense. Like I would not write something simply because I feel like it's in the zeitgeist and it will be noticed, because by the time you get it out there, it's going to be the 200th one in line as opposed to the first one.
Right. And as an editor at these imprints, do you, in your position, do you get kind of final say if you're like, this is what I want, like, let's do it? Or do you have to get approval for what you bring in? And then have you had trouble if you're like, well, here's another vampire book, and they're like, we don't want more vampires, or here's this really weird concept I didn't think I would like, but it's great, and they're like, it's too weird. Like, what is that process like?
I have been in every single one of those situations. I don't care basically at what point you are or at what rank you are in the publishing world. You're still going to have to sell whatever book you like to somebody.
Hmm.
Whether that person is an editorial board to get an okay to make an offer, or if you are a marketing person and you're selling that book to a reader. You're always selling a book. And so you have to, no matter what you love and no matter what position you hold, have to say, like, this is why this book is going to be noticed. Um, and definitely it can be something, and I'll be honest, I'll be like, I'm going through this right now a lot with books that have like a social media component to them, or no offense meant to my current audience, but um, have protagonists who are podcasters. This is this is something that we're kind of dialing back on right now, because there was just a plethora, there was a run on this. And so I'm kind of going like, oh, if it's got like a wellness influencer, a podcaster as a protagonist, like, don't send it to me. I can basically guarantee that the minute that I say that, I will get a book that breaks the mold, and I go, yep. So I will then be sitting in a meeting and go like, look, I know we don't want another book like this, but let me tell you why this particular book is brilliant. And the reasoning that I can tell you end up giving in, let's say, 90% of the situations, is because I can say that it really doesn't matter that this person is, pick a thing, wellness influencer, podcaster. Like, if I took that element out of the book, it's still going to be an amazing book because of X, Y, and Z. And this just happens to be the framework in which this amazing thing is being brought forth. And that usually, fingers crossed, works. um but it's also true, like, those the books have to be kind of timeless and not just, I guess, zeitgeisty.
Mm. Like one of my pet peeves is when the hero is a writer. It's okay if that's like in adaptation, the hero had to be a writer. Like
Hmm.
but if you're just making them a writer and if they don't really need to be a writer, like make them something else. Like because it feels like some writers take the write what you know a little too literally. People can be other
Well,
things.
yeah, I know, but I see it more like it drives me nuts when a Gone Girl kind of started it, but it just went off the rails further and further from there with like unreliable female protagonists. And at first, it was there a mental issue there, and then it became, well, what was it? The girl on the train, and she
Mhm.
was drinking in the train on the way to the office, and did she really see what she thought she saw? And then it just exceeded from there and just kept going, and it was all of these women who were unreliable narrators because of X problem. um, and many people have X problems, but it was just like, it was overwhelming that it was this volume of unreliable female narrators that I couldn't, every once in a while it was fine. But it just became like every woman that was crossing my desk became somebody that was questionable and that could not be believed. And I did not enjoy that particular moment in publishing very much at all.
Didn't
Oh,
they
there'll
make
be
a movie with um one of the Kristen actresses?
Belle,
Kristen Bell, that was
yes.
like the woman on the train who looked through the window or something. And
Yes.
it like I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a spoof off of all of those
Yes.
books and
No,
movies.
yeah, that was very, very funny.
So I'm just so curious. Are most of the authors you take on have to have their books turned into an audiobook? Have they already published their books, or do you ever take on writers who they have like an unpublished manuscript and you just do an audiobook with them? I'm just so curious how that works.
I would say, in a vague sense, it's probably 50-50.
Oh, wow.
About half of the authors have already published in some way, whether it's, self-publishing or smaller press or hybrid. I have acquired a number of debuts. Most of those authors either are planning on publishing themselves.
Mhm.
I have a book coming out in the fall, that is being published in print from a nonprofit press, Zank Books, which is amazing. And we're doing the audio there. So it's a little bit of kind of everything, which is fun as an editor. Like I get to look at a lot of different types of books instead of just sticking in one kind of narrow lane. And it's been a real pleasure doing that with audio.
I've got a question about audiobook rights. And I almost said, I know you're not a lawyer, but you are a lawyer.
I am a
But
lawyer, but
Oh man.
I'm about to say, what I'm about to say is definitely not considered legal advice. I'm
exactly.
scared
So
now.
disclaimer time. Um, but like so you're talking about all these different authors and people who might have self-published or maybe published. What would you suggest people with audio rights? Like any kind of thoughts when in the contract phase about retaining them, or what is the trend now? Mostly, is the publisher mostly looking for them? Can people retain them
It's
themselves?
it's across the board. And speaking in a very general sense, I see authors who retain them and try to carve them out from a deal to sell them separately. I see publishers who would like to take a book in all formats,
Mhm.
um, because for example, a company like Simon and Schuster, we have audio arms, we have strong foreign rights representation, we have everything on board, and can probably place those rights or use them, um, ourselves in a very strong way. Now, take a very small publisher or an independent press or an author who's publishing for themselves. audiobook can be cost prohibitive. And so a lot of small publishers don't exercise those rights. So, keeping those back and being able to sell those elsewhere can be another revenue stream for a writer. But it just very much depends across the board, what you're looking for, who you're publishing with, and what your own, capabilities are. I know authors who publish their own audio and do amazing and make a ton of money at it, and others who, definitely benefit from an audio publisher. So there's, something out there for everybody, but it's definitely worth thinking, what rights you might want to potentially hold back when you talk to a publisher.
So I want to just also touch on the first 50 pages, and because that's the session you're teaching in Symposium coming up. Um, did I mention that's coming up on July 23rd?
I don't think that you did.
But also something sticks in my mind about advice you gave me, personally advice, like, I don't know, a year or more ago, was that a lot of authors don't pay enough attention. They're so focused on their query letter that they're not thinking about the quality of the first 50 pages and how, you know, that matters. So, I mean, obviously it matters because you want them to then request the full, but the first 50, I mean, if you don't, I feel like there's a little wiggle room in that, like that if you really grab them for the first 50 and you show them that you are a great writer and you have command, that then there's a little bit more leniency with the rest of it because they know that could be fixed because you're capable of writing really well. Does that make sense?
It does. And I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. So hopefully you don't edit this out. Otherwise, this won't make sense. But about when I was talking about social media and like if you have a strong social media presence, it's a value add, right? I feel like a strong query letter is a value add because, and realize I am not speaking for every editor, in publishing, period. But a query letter when I get one in my inbox is kind of secondary. Like I love if, if you've got the genre in there and it's something I'm looking for and your hook line seems great, then I'm probably in and I'm going to open the pages. It doesn't matter what the rest of the letter says, right? So it's just another opportunity to grab or impress me or go, oh my goodness, I need to read this one first, as opposed to it's just going in the pile with everybody else's. So I think the query letter can be overemphasized, like it's the be all end all, where it's to me, it's a value add. And where the decision factor is in those first 50 pages. And that's not just true to get an agent or to get an editor or publisher interested. It's true when you get to the book purchasing process as well. Because I mean, if Amazon has taught us nothing, it's the fact that we've got that first, look at the book, the sample. Do you want to read a sample? And that's going to be a yes or no on whether or not you buy the book. If you are browsing in a bookstore, I can guarantee the things that you look at are in this order. First, you look at the cover and the title. And if you like that, then you're going to flip the book over and read what's on the back. And if you like what's on the back, you're going to open it and read that first page and maybe the second and maybe the third, depending on, how long you want to stand there in that bookstore. So we do that in person and we kind of do that online too, because we see the cover that looks really cool. Then we go to Amazon, read that description. Then the next step is, can we read a sample? And we buy the book or don't. And so basically you are selling your book at every point along the process on those first 50 pages.
No
And
pressure.
so, yeah, no pressure. But these, and you can, if you've gotten the faith of your reader in those first 50 pages, in a sense, you're golden because you can have a kind of, you should never have this, but you should have a kind of soggy, like, midpoint, as long as you land the plane, like you start the plane and it's really strong and I'm on board with you, whatever happens, right? There can be some turbulence in the middle. As long as we land that plane, I'm going to go, that was a great book. That was worth it. I'm going to recommend the book. I'm going to give it 5 stars. But I can tell you, you're going to lose a lot of people in those first 50 pages, whether it's at the beginning of the process with an agent or editor or a reader. If you're not like, I still remember this one workshop that I was giving, and I was talking about something similar to this because I am, if nothing else, a broken record. And this guy in the front row raises his hand and he's like, I'm writing this book and it really doesn't get started until the second chapter. Like, it doesn't make a lot of sense to you until you get there. And he's explaining to me why we have to keep reading. And I'm like, then why did you write the first, like, why do we have the first chapter?
Right.
Like, who is that for? And I find it true with a lot of newer writers where I personally am not an outliner. I probably should be, or at least do more than I do. But I think that a lot of that extra fat in the first 50 pages, in the first few chapters, is a writer getting to know their character, their setting, and their plot. And once they do that, once they feel comfortable, once they hit that groove, that's when the book really starts.
Mhm.
And you need to be able to recognize that as the writer and go back and go, okay, they didn't need to know like that John wakes up at 7 a.m. every morning and brushes his teeth and then walks to the coffee shop and then does this. Like that was me learning who John was. And so let's take that out of the book and start it when we get John to the coffee shop. And, there's the kidnapping or whatever it is where, we're getting to the meat of the story. And so recognizing that and where it was just like your own flexing your muscles, the warm up, the stretching before you start to run. Um, as a reader, we don't want to see that warm up. We want to just see after that starting gate. So I think that's my advice for the first 50 pages that I will gladly expand upon ad nauseum during the symposium.
And I have to say, you had told me that before about like writers often make the mistake of starting in the wrong spot of the story, like starting in a weak spot or, just like you said, getting to know your characters. I took that advice into when I'm judging for our unpublished contest. And in the beginning, like if I'm reading something, those first, few pages, I'm like, yeah, this isn't really pulling me in. I keep reading because I know they probably just started in the wrong place.
Mhm.
If their writing is still really good, maybe just not the most interesting way to start. I'm not going to stop reading that in the contest section. But if I'm in a bookstore and it's already been published,
Exactly.
no. Like
Yeah.
I often say
Or
I
if
give a
you
book
are an
50
agent
pages.
or editor with, 500 submissions in your inbox,
Mm-hmm.
not everybody is going to be as nice as you are either and go like, if they're not grabbing me and the first 2 pages, like I'm out. You might not get, even if it's the best book that's ever happened in the history of the world, starting on chapter 2, you might not get somebody's attention to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to recognize that. And it's not about them. It's about you and how you're telling your story.
Go
We
ahead.
actually get that question a lot for the unpublished contest is I know you guys are asking for like the first 5,000 words, but can I send in like chapters 5 through 8 instead because that's where like things are good. And
Yeah.
that's just
Then
such a red
then do
flag.
not exactly. Then start your screenplay, start your book at chapter 5.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's
Like
just
that's yeah. The shortest part of the movie is that setup of like what happened in the past that we have to know to see the rest of it. And it still has to be like super dynamic and make us pay attention to want to get to, okay, now we're going to see the rest of the story.
right.
um so yeah, it's and I get it, it's tough. but you're not, it's kind of an unwritten contract that a writer has with the reader. Like, we are not going to waste your time. We're going to give you something that by the time you put it down, like you feel your time is worth what you have spent. Because think about it, like, in addition to spending money on a book, we're spending something more precious, which is our time
Hmm.
in reading this thing or watching this thing. And so it's like, I really want to feel like my time was respected.
We might have you back to talk about endings because that's when I get really pissed off. Like if I have spent hours and hours and hours reading somebody's book and then the ending sucks, I am
Uh-huh.
mad. Like I'm like legit mad.
I know. And this is something that, like, I find absolutely fascinating because it is, and I am the same way myself. But outside of, let's say, books and movies and theater, like, take another art, right? Like, let's say, I believe cooking is an art, right? And you have an amazing meal, and the appetizer is delicious, the entree is delicious, like absolutely everything, the ambiance is great, and you order dessert, and the dessert is kind of, it's not even bad, right? It's just like, I'd come back here, I won't get it again. It's not like you're gonna flip the table over and be like, oh my God, I'm never coming back to this restaurant. This restaurant is total shit. I'm going to tell everybody that I've ever met not to go to this restaurant. Right? Now, going back to the book that you just finished and you didn't like that last like 5 pages of, which is the dessert, you are totally going to throw that book across the room
Yes.
and tell everybody that you know not to buy that book and
Hmm.
how terrible it was, despite the fact that, let's say, it takes you, I'm just making this up here, 10 hours to read a book. And it was only the last 60 minutes of that period that you didn't love the book, and the rest of the book was great. You're still gonna like color that, and the same thing works for movies, like I said, or a play. Like, if that last little bit is not satisfying, you're flipping that table. And it's just really interesting how we feel so much more personally attached and involved to that sort of art that we will get really mad if that contract is broken.
Agreed. And also the reverse can be true. The movie or the book could just be okay, okay, like a good strong beginning to pull you in, but then just kind of like, it's okay, get it, well, whatever, blah blah blah. And then the ending is amazing. That then you never saw it coming. Then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, that was great. You know, that can be true as
Well,
well.
how much time do we have before you kick me out of here?
Oh gosh. Well, whatever.
I rented the movie Sinners,
Hmm.
which I don't know if
I
anyone
have
has
not
seen.
seen.
Oh
I
my
haven't seen
God.
it yet. It's on my list
This
though.
movie, okay, so a lot of people, I will not be the first to make this somewhat similar statement. Um, it reminds me a little bit of From Dusk Till Dawn, which I don't know if anybody that I am talking to has seen that movie either, but it was from the 90s, and it was uh, Robert Rodriguez who did the mariachi, and then Desperado. He and Quentin Tarantino teamed up to do From Dusk Till Dawn, and this was before really either one of them were famous in any way. It was George Clooney before he was famous, Juliette Lewis, Harvey Keitel, Salma Hayek. Like, it was a really great cast of people. It's a
Yeah.
vampire movie.
Ooh.
And the thing about this movie, the conceit, I mean, there's a lot of things that are actually really great about this movie, no matter how you feel about Tarantino, um, and his associates. Um, but the thing that was really intriguing about it was, it's a vampire movie, right? Like, you have bought tickets to this movie that is a vampire movie. It does not become a vampire movie until probably halfway through, if not later in the movie. It starts with George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino, who is his co-star. They rob a bank, and they're on the run from robbing this bank, and they have to get from California to Mexico and over the border to get the money and wash the money and all of this. And that is like, if you did not read the description of the movie, when you get to this like halfway point and they get to this bar and suddenly there are vampires in this bar, you would have been really, really freaking surprised. Okay.
Like, what is happening?
Exactly. And so as a result, a lot of people are comparing Sinners to this movie because I watched it and I was floored. I think it was the best movie that I've watched in, I don't know, 10 years. Like, just on the whole, it was a great movie. And so I decided, I was like, my mother hates horror movies. I have to beg and cajole and make sure it's not too gory. And I was on the fence as to whether or not I should show her this one. And I was like, it's so good though. And so I tell her, I'm like, we're going to watch this vampire movie and I'm going to tell you a few times to look away. But, so I turn it on and we start watching this. And about halfway through, well, not even quite that far, but let's say a third plus of the way through, I say something about vampires. And she's like, oh, that's this movie? I thought you were talking about a different movie. Because just like From Dusk Till Dawn, the vampire stuff doesn't start until like at least halfway in. And up until that point, it is a brilliant historical piece, wonderfully acted. The cinematography is magnificent. And I would say it's as much a vampire movie as it is, are you ready for it? A musical.
Oh,
What?
didn't see
Like,
that coming.
it is so good. And like I said, all of these things are true. But I thought it was an interesting kind of segue between what we were just talking about that, like those first 50 pages, because this would be the exception. These two movies and similar things would be the exception to that rule because I told you it was a vampire story, but you certainly weren't seeing it in the first 50 pages. But it had to be so good that it would keep you going until you got to that point. Oh,
So here's the conundrum. Like if you were reading somebody's work, say this was a book and you're reading, and the query was about it being a vampire book, and you're reading the first 50 pages and you're like, I'm not seeing any indication of this. Like, would that, like, how would an author, not that there's probably many authors who have this situation, but
you'd be surprised. But I think it's more the quality of that writing. If you're going to
mm,
do something like this, where you know that it's a slow burn, or you know that it's going to be mid book switch in some way. Um, I do think that you have to prime your audience for it. That's what the poster's for. That's what the description's for. That's what your book cover is for. You'd want to make sure that you were signaling vampire on the cover of that book or in the back cover copy so that we knew it was coming and we weren't going to be going to be like surprised and think it was just, a historical piece until suddenly where the hell did these vampires come from? So we have all of these other devices to prime us as humans to make sure that we're going to be okay with this. But the biggest thing is to just write the hell out of that first part, where it's like, even if the vampires didn't show up, I would have, in both of the instances of this movie, with From Dusk Till Dawn and the bank robbery, and with Sinners and the initial, the opening period piece, historical part of it, I would have kept watching that movie anyway.
mm.
Um, so, it's got to be that good, but then to go like, I want my reader or my watcher to be going, oh, okay, I know there's going to be vampires. How the hell are they going to do this? And I can't wait to see. Like
Yeah.
that's what you want. You want that anticipation.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. So, Chantelle, as we wrap this up, can you let our audience know where they can find out more about you and the socials and all that stuff, which we will also put in the show notes?
Okay, absolutely. So you can find me and links to everything else at chantelleaimee.com. I do editing and consulting through 22 Literary, which are the numbers and then the word literary. And on most socials, I am at Suspense Siren.
And you'll also recognize that it's Chantelle because there will be a picture of her dog.
Yes, Boston Terriers everywhere. You'll know it's me.
Well, Chantelle, thank you so much for joining us. This was so much fun. I learned a ton, and I'm sure our audience did too.
Thank you so much for having me, both of you.
Yeah,
And
thank you so much.
and everyone can find her on our symposium page too, which I will link to her host page because she's also taught some other sessions for us as well. So this wasn't a complete plug show. This was a show about Chantelle, but I just can't help myself. The Story Will Save You is a Pipeline Artists original podcast. Like, subscribe, and follow us on social media at Pipeline Artists and at Book Pipeline. For more information, visit pipelineartist.com and bookpipeline.com, where we have contests for unpublished manuscripts as well as for published books that would make great adaptations for either film or television. Learn more about our efforts to help writers find publishing success on bookpipeline.com. Until next time, let the story save you.